It's so good to see you. Hi, good evening. Welcome to the CED Faculty Lecture Series. Before I introduce our speaker, I just wanted to remind everybody of a couple of upcoming events. So next Wednesday at this same time and location, there will be another guest lecture. It is Vida Pivo. Vida is a postdoc scholar and assistant professor from the University of Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning, who specializes in architectural and urban history, environmental studies, and the use in the global and U.S. in the global context. So mark your calendars for that. And then the Friday after that, on the 14th at 12 o'clock in this space, I'm going to be hosting a leadership panel. So it's going to include some of UGA's leaders. We have the provost for for faculty affairs and the interim provost for college programming, and then I have the ASLA vice president of education coming, and also the president of the American Planning Association student or academic group. So, so please plan on attending that. Lunch will be provided, so it'll be here at 12 o'clock next Friday, not this Friday, the following Friday. So now on to our current speaker. I have the pleasure of introducing a longtime friend of mine, Donnie Longenecker. Donnie is a landscape architect, entrepreneur, and educator. During his time as lecturer at CED, he has taught almost every course in the BLA curriculum, which I can attest to. Over the last few years, his design studios have focused on helping organizations and municipalities with big dreams and small budgets. He also teaches professional practice and does a great job at like a Shark Tank event and construction documentation. In addition to his responsibilities as senior lecturer, he's also the coordinator for the CED continuing education programs. Each year, the Landscape Architecture Short Course and the Georgia Larry Review provide continuing education and exam preparation for over 150 registered and aspiring landscape architects. So please help me welcome our esteemed colleague, Donnie Longenecker.
Thank you, Ashley. So I'm just going to tell you guys, we're just going to spend the next hour going through the story of this project that I've been working on for the last 4 years. And the story gets started about 4 years ago. See if I can use this spotlight thing. Oh yeah, this lady right here, Denise Everson, who is a district coordinator for the UGA Extension Service, called our own Jennifer Lewis, spotlight right there, and said, Jennifer, we are building a fitness park in Crawfordville, Georgia, and we can't figure out how to really make it work. So can you guys come as landscape architects and take a look at this and give us some advice on what to do? So Jennifer got together with David Spooner, who at that time had Ashley's position, who was Associate Dean of Academic Affairs, and they called me because I've worked on a lot of community type projects, and they said, we think we've got a project for one of your studios, let's go to Crawfordville and check it out. So we get out there, and as you guys can see with the slides, Jennifer's very excited and David is very excited to be there. And I'm just being facetious because really all the park was they just poured a bunch of crusher run on the ground and it was washing out and going everywhere. And they really didn't have a lot of plans for what it was that they were trying to do. And so I was kind of scratching my head about, you know, what in the world is this all about? How am I going to turn this into a semester project for my students? And so we left, and I had a lot of questions about what was going on. What I didn't realize at the time was that this thing was a tip of a very big project funded by the Centers for Disease Control. And what's happened is the CDC has realized that obesity is a huge problem in America. And they've given a lot of money to land-grant universities to help improve the health statistics of counties with high obesity rates. And so the CDC calls this program the HOP, or High Obesity Program. And the UGA College of Public Health was awarded the HOP grant to the tune of, I think, about $4.5 to $5 million in 2018. And what they did is they chose 5 counties to work in that are underserved, that have really poor health statistics. And the 5 counties are Tolliver County, Dooley, Stewart, Clay, and Calhoun. And here's a little, some demographics for the counties. And as you can see, there's an above average food insecurity score. And what that means is that people don't have the means to eat a healthy diet. So these counties were all in food deserts, which also means that, that you live a significant distance away from a grocery store or a place where you can get fresh food. As you can also see, the median household income is well below the median income for the state of Georgia. So these are underserved rural communities, and using the word impoverished is probably not an exaggeration. So the CDC, as I said, they work with land-grant universities because the land-grant universities have what's called an extension service. And what they are is they're an arm of the university that works in the community to help foster different things that are going on in the community. So in our case, you have extension agents that help with nutrition, that help with growing food, that there may be extension agents that help with livestock, things like that. And so what the CDC strategy was is they could get the extension agents into the community, and they would all work with the local residents together to kind of create some conditions that would improve the health of each of the communities. So there was 2 strategies that the CDC wanted to adopt for this. And the first strategy is a nutrition strategy, and that's what I talked about earlier, is you're going to try to get people to eat better. You're going to try to provide more options for healthy food. And the second strategy is called the physical activity strategy. And what that boils down to is you're attempting to create opportunities in the built environment for people to get out and exercise, okay? Manipulating the built environment to achieve a desired outcome. That kind of sounds like what we do as landscape architects, right? So you look a little bit closer at the CDC documentation, and they talk about that their primary goal behind physical activity, the physical activity strategy, is to provide active routes to everyday destinations. And so what they say is if we can figure out where people live and where they go on a day-to-day basis, and then we can connect the dots in a way that makes it safe and equitable and pleasant for people to walk or bike, that people are going to choose to ride a bike or to walk to go to the post office or go to the grocery store. And in turn, that amount of physical exercise is going to make the community healthier. So that's kind of the basis of what was going on with the grant. So one Friday night, after we got back from this site visit, I'm sitting around doing whatever it is that I do on a Friday night, and I got an email from David, and he's like, hey, Marcia Davis, who was the principal investigator of the grant, who's now the dean of the College of Public Health, and our own dean, Sonia Hurt, were sitting around at this dean's retreat that they have in the summer, and they were talking about this project. And Marcia said, we have this great team of people that we pulled together from different units on the college, but we're missing someone who can specialize in how do we alter the built environment. And so Sonia was reaching out to David to reach out to me to see if I would be interested in helping out with this project. And so the emails were traded back and forth, and I'm one of these crazy people that I never say no. I take on whatever kind of thing that needs to be done. So I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm going to do it. I think it'll be okay, right? And so I don't think any more about it. And then the next thing I know, I'm in the office with Sonia and David, and they're like, hey, this is really going to happen, and we need you to put together a proposal to start working in the fall when you teach your 40-50 class. So I had a little bit of buyer's remorse about that, right? My background is in resort residential land development, okay? Just like I say on this slide. I can put McMansions on a golf course. I can do everything. Streetscapes, I don't know. Streetscapes in a rural community, I really don't know about that. And I'm like, man, I don't know. What in the world have I signed up for? So what I figured out is just to start reading through some of the materials and trying to put this proposal together is that we were really trying to accomplish 3 objectives with this project. And the first one is to assist the College of Public Health and the CDC in achieving their project objectives, right? Which we already kind of talked about. The next one was to create something of value for the communities that we're working in. And I'm going to give a little shout out to Jessica Fernandez because she she teaches an advanced graphics class and has really upped the game of the students when it comes time to generate 3D models and things that really help our clients and other people visualize our designs. And so it's amazing how much these plans and ideas that the students generate can bring a value to the community. Not only does it give them plans for things that they might want to do in the future, but it also, really most importantly, it gives these people in some of these impoverished areas some hope that the future could be a little bit better. So the third objective was trying to create a valuable learning experience for the students, right? And so I had to figure out how we're going to work this process and make it all come together so that we can meet the learning objectives of the studio class that I'm teaching, but more importantly, it can help the students learn how to think like a landscape architect and learn a little bit more about the practice of landscape architecture. And there was a fourth goal, but this is like a big, way out there, 10, 15, 20 years from now goal that I may never ever see, but it's something to think about. And that's this. If we can do some work with the CDC and we can create some things in these communities, and as a part of the grant, they're tracking the health of the communities in what's called a longitudinal study, for over time, over several years. And if we can create some evidence that the scientists will accept that our jobs as landscape architects actually help make people healthier, then we could really open Pandora's box, if you will, for this profession and create a situation where the CDC is actually saying, hey, if you want to make your community healthier, you need to bring a landscape architect in to help improve the health of everybody in the environment. So that's kind of my big, people say you should have these big overarching long-range goals. So that's kind of one of my big wild dreams about this whole thing. I don't know that we're going to get that far, but that's kind of how I look at this. So the next thing I had to do is get together and read everything I could about what was going on with the grant. I had to literally drink from the fire hose of scientific literature, published papers about physical activities and natural environments. And I had 2 people that were really helping me with this. The first is Brian Orland, who's retired from CED. He was one of my former professors at the University of Illinois. Brian was a great person. he had his own fire hose of information that he would shoot my way. And so he was just constantly sending me scientific articles on, how do you solve food deserts? How do you get people to exercise? And then the CDC had its own fire hose of information that I had to pay attention to as well. And I was lucky enough to have Teresa as my assistant over the summer, and her job was to print out a gabillion pages of articles, 3-hole punch them, put them in the binder so I could read through them and then sort them out and classify them so that I could put everything together and organize it to put this proposal together. And what I started to find out with all this literature review and research was that what the CDC was asking us to do was actually scientifically valid. Go figure, huh? The CDC, bunch of scientists, they're not going to ask you to do something that isn't. So I found out that in rural areas, if we can provide people access to walking trails or access to the ability to walk, they will actually get out and exercise. So there's some proof behind the strategy that they're trying to get us to implement. So I started to think about, okay, how do we make this work as landscape architects? And what I came up with was a proposal and a process that is deeply rooted in everything that we do as landscape architects. And it starts with this guy up here, Ian McHarg, right? Ian McHarg wrote his famous book, Design with Nature, and he outlined what is now known as the McHargian method for site analysis. And that's where you inventory everything on a site, all the opportunities, all the constraints, and you create a set of overlay maps and you lay them on top of each other. And then through overlaying the maps, you can see kind of the path of least resistance for developing a site. So what I said that we would do is we would do that with each of the communities that we were working in. We would map out where people live, where they want to go, and then we would look at all the site conditions between the two destinations and figure out what was the path of least resistance for people to travel those active routes to the everyday destination. The other component of this process was community engagement. So as a part of the grant, CDC has already set up these coalitions, or the College of Public Health has set up these coalitions within these communities. So what we could do is we could take our designs, and it's really no different than the practice of landscape architecture when everybody gets out of here, and if you go to work for a firm, you're going to design something and you're going to go meet with the client. And then the client's going to give you feedback about whether your design meets their goals or expectations, and you've got to go back and adjust it. So that's what we were going to do. That's what I proposed to do, is that we were going to come up with our design ideas, and then we would go meet with our clients, which is the community, get some feedback, and then refine the designs and kind of come up with some final ideas that could help everybody out. And so I sent it to this person right here, who's Hannah Southall. At the time, she was essentially the chief operating officer for the grant. She ran it by Marcia Davis. They said, this is great, let's get started when class starts in August. And so this was I don't know, July. So I had a month to kind of get everything ready and get ready for class. So the first thing you need as a landscape architect when you start working on any project is a base map. And so that was my first struggle. How do I get a base map for Tolliver County, Georgia, which is right there? How do I get a base map for that county? And it's basically totally rural, out in the middle of nowhere. There's not going to be a planning department. There's not going to be a surveyor that's going to be able to give me this information. So what I did was I reached out to one of the Georgia Regional Commissions. And the Georgia Regional Commissions are these groups that manage, kind of shepherd development activities in several regions of the states. And so I reached out to them and I said, hey, I need some GIS information that I can put together for a base map for this project that I'm working on for the College of Public Health and the CDC. And I ran into this guy right here, Edward Morrow, and Edward said, wait, what are you doing? You're doing physical activity and public health? He's like, that's a big component of our master planning process, and we're in the process of updating the comprehensive plan for Toliver County. And so I want to look over your shoulder and see what's going on with everything. And so I'm thinking, this is great. You know, there's no pressure on me. I've got the College of Public Health, you know, CDC. I don't know. I haven't figured out what I'm doing yet. And now I got this governmental authority kind of looking over my shoulder, and I'm just like, yeah, I hope this works out okay. So what we did is we were able to get our GIS information. And again, I was fortunate enough to have several people to help us out with that. Allison Smith teaches a GIS class here in the college. And one of my next assistant, Julia, right here, she had taken Allison's GIS class. And so she already knew enough to be dangerous and how to manipulate the information. I know enough about GIS to like crash the computer and make it not work anymore, but I kind of know what we need to do. So I was able to get Julia and kind of get her to start building the framework of our GIS analysis. The guy in the middle, Braden Meadows, was in my studio, and he took on the role of GIS manager for the whole project. So what we did was we mapped out all the places in Toliver County with historical significance, because there's really not a lot of places to go to in Toliver County. And we put a walkability radius around it. And then we started to think about how we were going to connect the dots between the historically significant sites in Toliver County and allow people to walk between those areas. And we did some other classic site analysis. We looked at slopes, we looked at floodplains, we looked at all those things which could have a negative effect on our walkability. The other thing that we used as a reference is this work right here by the US DOT, and it is called the Small Town and Rural Multimodal Network Guide. And basically what it is it's a series of recommendations for increasing mobility and walkability and bikeability in rural communities. And it's a very prescriptive document. It tells you exactly what to do based upon the road corridor width, the speed, the surrounding land uses. And so we could use this as a guide. Once we kind of did our analysis, we could basically use this and say, here's what's going on site, and here's the intervention that we need to propose for this particular road corridor. So that's what we started to do. Another thing that we looked at was this study called the Tammany Trace Trail, and it's in Louisiana, and basically it's a great little trail system that ends or starts at the Abita Brewery in Louisiana, just a little bit north of New Orleans. And so naturally they get a lot of people on the trail, because a lot of people like to walk on a trail to go drink beer. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? But what's happened along the trail is that all the communities that are along the way have developed these things called trailheads. And so what they're doing is they create these activities, or they create these destinations where the people can get off the trail and they can interact with the community, or they can spend a little money and it helps the local economy. So we looked at that and we kind of said, okay, is there a way that we can kind of take that and use that here in Toliver County? So as we're coming up with a route for people to walk around, to exercise on, can we create these nodes where people could go do different things? They could exercise, they could, have a park, have some green space, things like that. So the class kept working. We did our analysis and we developed several concepts, and then we took them over to Toliver County to get public feedback. And you guys can see we did some green dot voting, so you can see with all the green dots, that's the plans that the county the folks in the county liked. So after analyzing the feedback, we came up with some further recommendations. And then what we did was we condensed everything into a report and developed some final recommendations for what people needed to do for in Crawfordville and in Toliver County. We generated some 3D models to help convey the picture of what we were trying to do. And the students also developed a countywide trail system. And the countywide trail system essentially runs down a power line through the middle of the county. We also developed plans for a community garden at the Toliver County School to help with the nutrition part of the CDC strategy. Another thing that we did is we used our GIS analysis skills and we looked at agricultural land, and we figured out that there was a lot of unused agricultural land that Toliver County could use to kind of produce its own food. And it would produce so much food that it could sell the food to surrounding counties and actually make income. We also figured out that if we could get people on the trail, there were a lot of people that lived around Toliver that would come into the county and spend a lot of money and on the trail. And so this would help improve the county. So we've got these trail systems for people to exercise. We've got agriculture, nutrition checked off, physical activity checked off. So I got my assistant that summer, Ashley Keeney, and we put together this 90-page report about all the wonderful things that we had done in Toliver County, right? And so when they get done implementing our plans, the rainbows and unicorns and leprechauns are all going to be running around and everybody's going to be happy. And it was well received. Everybody thought it was great, all the ideas that we came up with. And then we went and we gave it to the CDC. And they said, that's not what we're looking for. And the reason they said that's not what we're looking for isn't because we came up with bad ideas. It's because the county in which we were working didn't have the resources to implement the broad brush things that we were talking about. The trail system that we proposed would be essentially like the Firefly Trail. These days, building something like the Firefly Trail costs anywhere from $250,000 to $1 million a mile by the time you put in all the infrastructure and everything. Toliver County, and I'm being a little facetious here, but not too far out, Toliver County probably has a party if they have $1 left in their county budget at the end of their fiscal year. So they don't have the resources to build the trail system. And so the CDC said, that's a little too, you need to get a little more fine grain. So in stepped this fella, Mark Fenton. Mark Fenton teaches at Tufts University, and he has a degree in engineering, and he's become an expert on walkability and bikeability for the CDC, and he travels all over the country working with communities to try to figure out how they can increase their walkability and bikeability. And so what Mark was talking to me about is that we needed to do a finer grain inventory and analysis of the communities in which we're working. And the way Mark did this is he did something that was called a walk audit. And basically what that is you give the folks in the community this little form, and as they're walking down the street, they rate what the street corridor is like. And then you collect all that information, and that's a way of getting some inventory and analysis data for improvements that you want to make to the street corridors and sidewalks in the community. And so this was another article that we read about, again, another way to do walk audits. And so these were all things that we were interested in analyzing when we start to go back and look a little fine grain on what we're doing. The third thing that kind of came into play was I finally was able to get my hands on this book right here. This book is written by Ann Forsyth, and she heads the Healthy Place Initiative, I think, at Harvard. And and talks about what you have to do to really have a positive effect on health in a community. And she talked about two things that really stood out to me. And the first one was that the base thing you should do is you should plan to take care of the vulnerable populations in the community first. And the vulnerable populations are defined as, racial and ethnic minorities, children, elderly, socioeconomically disadvantaged, underinsured, or people that have medical conditions. And she said if we can start planning to provide access for these people, then it kind of creates a rising tide, because you got to assume that the network works pretty well for those of us who are in health, who are in good health, who aren't disadvantaged with economics or race issues. And so she talked about you got to find the vulnerable people, you got to figure out how to get them to where they need to go, and then she also talked about the destinations that people need to go to, and she started classifying them in a little different way that the CDC did. So that really kind of added to the procedure. So the next step is we went to Dooley County. And we got the students, we started doing walk audits through the streets in Dooley County, and this is kind of what it looks like in all these communities, very rural. And we started doing the walk audits, we started collecting the data, we tried to have a community meeting, and that didn't work too well, but we met with some students at the high school, we got some input from them about what we were going to do, and we came back to Athens. And everything was growing great. And then this guy showed up, right? And he shut us all down. And so here I am running this exercise where we need to go interact with the community, and we need to figure out, how to get data on the ground from sites, and we can't go anywhere. We can't even leave our houses. And how are we going to accomplish this? So what we started to do is, just like everybody else, we did everything virtually. So we would have our community meetings on Zoom. We would meet with the College of Public Health people on Zoom. We would have Mark Fenton give lectures to the class on Zoom. And the problem with that was that we couldn't get true community feedback, because our vulnerable populations, they typically don't have access to internet. They typically don't have access to Zoom. So we were missing that part of our feedback loop. In order to handle the walk audits, what we started to do is use something that y'all use every day, which is Google Street View. And so I literally had the students, we divided them up into groups, and they literally started virtually walking the streets in the town. We gave them the walk audit, materials, and they could start making their lists of what needed to happen on each of the street corridors in town. For destinations, we used Google Maps. We looked at all the different businesses and everything that pop up when you zoom down on an area, and we started classifying them according to Forsyth's classifications, which is wants, social/churches, government, needs, and needs. And so really the way you wanted to do this is you figured out what people needed, what the vulnerable population needed, and then you were trying to connect the dots between where those folks lived and how to get them to places that they need to go on a daily basis. We used the land use maps to locate the residential area, and then we verified that with Google Street View. We were trying to find, places where our vulnerable populations lived. One of the interesting things we did is we worked with Jessica Fernandez one semester. She does some interesting stuff using some cell phone data that's readily available, and does some statistical analysis to figure out how people move around in various places. And so we looked at the city of Fort Gaines in Clay County, and Jessica was able to determine the most frequently visited places in Fort Gaines using her statistical analysis tools. And we found out that the most frequently visited place in Fort Gaines was this place right here. It's called Touch of Blossoms. It is any of you are from the rural South, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It is a florist. They sell tombstones. You can't see it, but you probably can't, but they sell tombstones. They're the feed store. They're the garden supply store. They're the FedEx drop spot. They're the Western Union. They rent U-Haul trucks. They rent garden equipment. They rent everything. And so that's why it's the most visited place in town. And when we went down to Fort Gaines a couple weeks ago, I got to go in there and talk to the guy that owns the store, talk to him for a little bit, and I let him know that he is statistically the most visited place in the town. He was very happy to hear that, obviously. So we then took our data that we were gathering from, just maps. We had to come up with a different way to do our analysis because we're all virtual on Zoom, and I was telling the students how to find different things. And so we pulled together all of our analysis maps, pulled them into Illustrator, AutoCAD, Photoshop, and figured out a way to virtually overlay them so that we could figure out what was going on. And the result of this was a composite analysis that talked about what was going on with the street conditions in each of our towns and what each student felt like needed to be done to make the conditions a little bit better for walkers and bikers in the community. And so these analysis maps eventually became the master plans for the interventions that we were going to use in the communities. So we took the master plans and then we jumped into Street View. We took some screenshots and went into Photoshop and kind of created some plans and renderings to help people visualize what was going on. And then one strategy was to propose some tactical urbanism pop-up demonstrations of the different interventions. And this would have been a great strategy had we not been in the middle of COVID. Because the whole idea is that you get the community to tell you what they like, and then you get the leadership to agree that we're going to have a demonstration of a bike lane on this street on such and such a date. And you get everybody there and you show them what the bike lane is like, and then you build some political consensus so that the community can move a little bit closer to making this a reality. While this is a great exercise for the class to do, they got exposure to tactical urbanism. I gave them several tactical urbanism manuals that are available, and they came up with some great ideas. It was just unfeasible given the conditions of COVID and that we couldn't travel and implement any of these pop-up demonstrations. We also looked at vacant and unused parcels in each of our communities. And I had the students use QPublic and the land use maps to find parcels that belong to either the municipality or the county government. And then they creatively came up with some designs that would align with the physical activity strategies of the grant. So in essence, we're kind of copying the Tammany Trail idea, and that we're creating these loops for people to walk in a town, and we've got a vacant parcel over here, and somebody says, oh, let's turn this into a park where people can just, gather and we can create some social interaction. Or maybe we turn this area into a farmer's market or something like that. So we had all these solutions for doing things with this vacant property. And all this was good, but we started out using technology to do this, using GIS to do this, and I really wanted to get back to doing that because the way we were doing things was a little antiquated. It really wasn't giving a good experience to the class. It wasn't giving them the skills that they could use going forward as landscape architects. So the next semester, I had 3 students, Elise, Austin, and Alicia, who were doing their audit, and they started this spreadsheet, and they started putting all the stuff from the walk audit into a spreadsheet. And those of you that know anything about GIS know that you need a data table to set up and to build a GIS database. I mean, that's what it is it's a database. And so you have to figure out how to code things in a certain manner and give them a numerical designation so that it responds to whatever condition that you're trying to see or realize or analyze on the ground. So this coding system became the basis of a GIS tool that we then developed to analyze what was going on the ground in our grant communities. And my next assistant, Kayla Joyner, got the job of trying to figure out how to make this GIS tool work. And Kayla, I literally, like I say, I threw the books at her. I gave her the GIS tutorial. I gave her the small town and rural multimodal network guide. And I knew what we needed to do, but you know, I let her kind of figure out how to make this work. And so what she did is she created a form, an online form, that the students could use as they're going through and doing their walk audits to get the information into a format that we could then put into a GIS system. And we took it further and we said, you know, we're going to get the data into GIS. We're going to show everybody how to use the GIS system to do the analysis. And then we're going to teach them how to take the GIS data and turn it into deliverables that we can then show the community and about our design ideas. So we created a bunch of tutorials. I think Kayla made like 14 different tutorials on how to do all this stuff in the process. And luckily, we had a student in the class, Clarissa Costin, who was our guinea pig. And she was the person who ran through the tutorials. She had a little GIS experience in high school. And so she could tell us if what we were telling people to do worked or if it was, you know, out of line or if we needed to change things. So that's what Clarissa helped us out with. So we had all of these tutorials developed. And this is an example of the analysis product that was generated by KP, who was one of the students in the class. And the cool part about this was that the guys in the class, the guys and girls in the class, didn't just work with our data that we gave them. They went out and they found all sorts of crazy things that I would have never thought of, which was an important part of analysis in their minds to justify their design decision making. So it was really interesting and really cool to see what everybody used, because we had people who went and found health statistics. One person found a GIS map of all the people who have a heart attack in one of these towns. And so they went and mapped them on the GIS map and they said, okay, this is where everybody lives that has a heart attack, so we need to make sure that these people get out and walk. I would have never thought about that, right? But that's what was, that's what was a great byproduct of this whole process. So we took that and then we turned this into some drawings where we talk about the different interventions and how we're going to apply them in the towns. And then again, we took some parcels that needed to have some work done to them. This is a park in Leary, Georgia. Sarah Schaefer worked on a design with this, and again, she used the skills from Jessica's class to create a 3D model and a rendering so the community could see what the project would look like when it was completed. So we're in the last year of the grant, and we've got some things that we need to do before the sun sets. And so this last year, it's been kind of crazy, but what we've been able to do is we've had the class and we got the opportunity to visit all 5 of our communities. So we went back to the communities, we hung the drawings up on the wall, and we got some actual feedback from residents, real residents of the community, people who were members of these vulnerable populations, and they were able to give us some great feedback on the designs that we were proposing, whether they would work or whether they wouldn't. We also started to do some additional data collection. And one of the ideas that I came up with was, we've got these multimodal interventions from the Small Town Multimodal Guide. Do we really know that the people in the community like these interventions? If you're going to spend $2 million on a roadway improvement that's got a sidewalk or a bike lane and nobody uses it, you've kind of wasted $2 million, right? So I said, why don't we create a survey where we ask people to tell us which of these interventions that they like. And then hopefully, if the data lines up, it'll give us a way to kind of prioritize the interventions and help the communities decide which ones are going to be the most effective. And then they can align their resources accordingly. So Liz Swift, my assistant this last year, she compiled all this information with the help of Catherine Melker and Dr. Lex Lamb, who was the evaluation person for the grant. And we came up with this way of collecting the data and getting the opinions of the people in the communities. And the number one most liked, most favored intervention was a simple old sidewalk. And the number one thing that people said that keeps them from walking in their community is the sidewalk is under disrepair. So that really kind of simplifies everything for these people in the communities. Is like build more sidewalks and fix the sidewalks that are there. And that's really not a hard reach for some of these communities to be able to do. We also got feedback on some of the plans that we were working on. And again, we were able to refine the designs and come up with some better ideas which more closely aligned with what the community wanted. This is in Tolliver County. This is a school. And right now what they're working on is they're working on getting the funds to build this pavilion right here. And they're hoping that that's going to start to get people to come into the park, use the park, and then they could worry about the next task on the list. So our next step, after we go back to the communities, we got the communities' opinions on things, then we're going to go back to the communities again and say, okay, this is what everybody told us that they would like to see. Now what are your priorities moving forward? And so Tolliver County, they decided they wanted to build that pavilion. This is in Fort Gaines, and this is a park that the studio designed in Fort Gaines. And what we were able to do is work with the mayor and try to get a AARP grant so that the city of Fort Gaines could complete all the work on the park that we designed. Unfortunately, they didn't get the grant, but they did get some funding to resurface some dilapidated basketball and tennis courts that were in the park. And so a couple weeks ago, when we were down there in Fort Gaines, we got to visit the resurfaced basketball courts. And we've got some ways to track people, I believe, to see how many people are using this and, kind of see if there's a positive effect on the health of the community because of this. The mayor is working on some other grants to finish up the rest of the stuff in the park. There's a lot of money out there with all the infrastructure bills. There's about $200 billion in funds that's available for these communities, but the problem is that any type of these grants, they require something that's called matching funds. And what that means is if you're going to come to me for a $100,000 grant, I'm going to ask you to come up with $25,000 before I'm going to give you $100,000. And if you're living in a county, like I said, that has a party when they have $1 at the end of the year, how in the heck are they going to come up with the $25,000 to get the match to really do something that they want to do? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to work with we're working with the regional development commissions, the Carl Vinson Institute of Government, economic development people to try to figure out ways that we can plug these communities into funding streams so that they can make some of this stuff happen. Another cool thing that happened as a result of this is Caroline Long. She was in the studio when we were working in Tolliver County. She was the person that came up with the design for this. The superintendent of the school built the garden. So that's a picture that was taken, I don't know, about a year ago at the garden after it was built. And so it was really cool to share these pictures with Caroline, because she never thought that it would get built. And Caroline actually did the schematic details for this. You know, she did the grading plan, she came up with the site plan, and we came up with some details for some of the raised bed gardens and things like that. And so it was really cool to, you know, for her to have that experience and then come out and see the thing built. So that was a great byproduct of the process. To go back to my friend Edward, he was able to get the trail plan approved and put through on the 5-year comprehensive plan. The reason this was a big deal, like I said, this trail system is probably never ever going to get built. But what the significance of this is that this puts this on higher on the priority list when funds, federal and state funds, do come into Tolliver County. They can assign some money, and maybe they won't build this whole trail system. Maybe they'll build just a little portion of it. But it creates that pathway for funding to come into the county so that things can happen. We've had another set of drawings get approved by Calhoun County in their comprehensive plan, so we're hoping that that's going to turn into some funding that's going to allow some things to be done. Another great spinoff of this project is one of the students that was in the studio last year came up to me at the end of the semester, and we sat down, we started talking, and they said, you know, I really liked your class, but I'm not going to take it again. I'm not going to take it in the spring. And I'm like, okay, why not? And they're like, well, to be honest with you, I need some sexier drawings for my portfolio. This isn't stuff that people will hire me for. And I said, what you don't understand is that this is a very cutting edge and important issue that's going on in the United States right now. And if you're able to show that you used evidence-based design to come up with a system to create a multimodal transportation network for a town, I'm like, you don't even know how big those buzzwords are in the design world. So lo and behold, this person ended up getting an internship with the PATH Foundation, which is run by a former classmate and CED alum, Greta DeMayo. And they are responsible for building all the trails around Atlanta and several of the trails around the state of Georgia. And I can almost guarantee you that why Greta hired this person is because she had experience working on trail systems. So that was a great side product of this. We've also had a couple of really cool spin-off projects from this partnership. This one right here, I gave a presentation at a public health conference a couple years ago, and I was approached by the CEO of the Clinch County Memorial Hospital. They wanted to design a tiny home village for their community so they could get some workers to come into town and help out with some of the industries that, you know, were short on workforce. And so this grad student, Anna Marie, she kind of came up with some design ideas, and it was a way to kind of alleviate problems of people that were close to being homeless in society. And so she based her master's research on how we can use a community like this to, you know, alleviate the problem of homelessness in society. We took her research and then we turned it into a capstone studio over the summer. And so the students designed this tiny home community in Homerville, Georgia. And it's still in the works. They're still trying to figure out whether or not they're going to develop the project. The other spin-off project, which just started last semester, Rachel Hubbard, who is one of our extension agents, contacted me. There's a very wealthy UGA alum that lives in South Georgia that wants to take part of his 1,000-acre farm and develop it into a trial garden that then can be used to benefit the local community in terms of providing agricultural education, teaching people how to grow stuff, excess food, crops, etc. are going to be sent to the food banks. And he needed some design help with that. So Rachel called me, and I was able to get Sarah Schaefer, and we're working on a design for this particular garden project. And the cool part about this is that if we get refunded by the CDC for the next round of the grant, this is actually in one of the counties that we're going to take on, and it's going to be part of the food and nutrition strategy. The third part that's really cool about this is, as many of you guys know, I'm working on starting a land development certificate here at the college, and the fellow that owns this property is a very wealthy land developer. He's created this company that they've done strip mall developments all over the United States. And he has already started donating to the land development program because of the work that we are doing on this project. And I'm hoping that this is going to be the first of many donations to come because of the work that we're doing. One of the last things that I'm going to talk about is this tool that they developed at Auburn University. It's a GIS-based tool that uses the Python programming language. And it does what we kind of have been doing a little bit. They figure out where the destinations are, where people live, and then it uses some traffic analysis to come up with some routes that we might want to suggest for interventions. So what I'm hoping to do, if we get refunded for the next round of the grant, is to take the research that we've done with Liz, take our GIS tool and figure out a way to combine it with what Auburn has done and really make an efficient system and tool for helping these communities evaluate what they can do to improve the public health. So that is it. This is all the team of the people that I've been working with on this project over the last 4 years. It's been a wild ride. It's been a lot of fun. It's done a lot of good, I hope, for these communities. And it's been a great experience for all the people that have participated in the classes. And again, like I said, the ultimate goal is if we can get the CDC to start telling people that they need to hire landscape architects. So thank you for coming, and I'll answer any questions that anybody might have.